This wonderful setting is the Tyrol Panorama above the town of Innsbruck to the south. And here, beside me, is the Imperial Hunting Club, which was opened by the Emperor Franz Josef I on the 28th of September 1893 in an area where we can see other Austrian heroes, and in particular we have the folk hero in many ways, Andreas Hofer, the person who led the uprisings against the French and who beat the French, or more to the point their allies, the Bavarians, here at this spot 3 times, and he himself was later captured by the Italians, the French ally, and was executed, shot by a firing squad. And here we have the Kaiser himself, Franz Josef I, 1830 to 1916. He is the 3rd longest reigning European monarch in history. Only Louis IV and one of the kings of Liechtenstein has outreigned him. It will take until 1920 for Queen Elizabeth II to take his position, and the way things are going, she probably will do that. Now, the future Kaiser was born in 1830 in Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, and at the age of 13 he became a colonel in the Austrian army. Now, that may seem a bit strange, but that shows what was going to be expected of him in future life. Indeed, every time you see him, he's in a military uniform. He clearly liked to play soldiers. Sometimes it wasn't a bad idea, though, because when there was an assassination attempt on his life, the stiff collar, which at the back of his neck, actually saved his life, and the person who tried to kill him, the knife, it did go through, but it was deflected, and one of his friends managed to save the Kaiser, and another one actually took care of the assassin. Now, in 1848, when he became Kaiser, there was a time of revolutions, and the royal family found it too difficult to live in Vienna. They had to flee here to Innsbruck, but after a while they thought it was safe enough to go back to Vienna after the Italians were beaten in late July. But that didn't last very long. Vienna was still unsafe. The court fled again, this time to Olomouc, which is today in the Czech Republic, but then it was a largely German-speaking town. The name Franz Josef was actually chosen to bring back memories of his great uncle, the Emperor Joseph II, who was remembered as a modernizing reformer. But this Franz Josef was not to be so. And I think that this is largely one of the problems. And also, it started off badly because in 1849 there was a constitutional crisis. There was a military campaign against the Hungarians who rebelled against the Habsburg authority. They wanted their ancient liberties returned to them. And there was fighting in Italy as the Italians attempted to get a large part of northern Italy was then Austrian and Italian-speaking populations, so who didn't really, or felt maybe they wanted to be part of Italy more than Austrian. Anyway, the emperor wanted to be emperor. He sought help. He got help from the Russians. The Tsar Nicholas I wanted to put down the Hungarian insurrection in order to maintain authoritarianism in Europe, and by the late summer of 1849 it was back to the way things were before. Franz Josef had made concessions to the Hungarians, and he went back on them. So the constitution in 1849 is suspended. There are a number of problems in the 1850s for Austrian external policy. First thing is the Crimean War, whereas it wasn't actually involved in the Crimean War, but Russia was defeated, and Russia was an ally of Austria. In fact, as I just said, it was the Russian Tsar who had sorted the Hungarians out only a few years earlier. Next thing that happened, Second War of Italian Independence, and Austria loses. Austria is on the winning side in the war against Denmark when it was the Prussian Austrian war against that country. Of course, that then led to the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, again a defeat. And that itself leads to the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, and the Habsburgs negotiate with the Hungarians on what things are going to be in the future. But it's not just the Hungarians where there's problems. There's problems in the Czech lands as well. Whereas, for example, the previous emperor had been crowned King of Bohemia in Prague, but Franz Josef never got round to that. Now, there was part of the Czech problem, if I want to call it that. I mean, the lands which they spoke Slavic languages, and there was clearly the desire to be independent of Austria was strong, but this was largely due to the failure of Vienna to be able to give concessions to the Czechs themselves. When you ever go to Prague, I mean, Prague does feel like an imperial city. Feels like it was the capital of an empire once. Another thing I think I really would like to point out is what happened with Germany. After the 1866 war, there's a situation whereby it is Bismarck who is the boss of all the German-speaking countries. It's no longer the Kaiser, Franz Josef of the Habsburg. In 1873, 2 years after the unification of Germany, and Austria sort of relegated to a minor position, Franz Josef entered into the League of Three Emperors, the Dreikaiserbund, that was with Wilhelm I of Germany and Tsar Alexander II of Russia. Now, one thing which is very important is that Bismarck refused to humiliate Austria after the defeat of 1866, or his victory of 1866. Whereas the Kaiser, the German king, a Prussian king I should say, was all for a big military parade and all the rest. Bismarck said, no, we're not having anything like that. He realized that Austria, although defeated in that war, although pushed out of the dominance of German lands, he realized that Austria was going to be a useful ally. With hindsight of what happened 48 years later, you may say, well, that wasn't the case. In fact, it was the Austrian involvement in the First World War that brought down the Hohenzollern regime, and also, indeed, the German Empire. Now, where Franz Josef was a bit more successful was in the Balkans. I say successful, but I don't know if successful is the right word to use. Maybe it isn't. What happened in the 1870s was there was a revolt against the Muslim Turks by the Christian populations of the Balkans. The local population looked to the Russians for help, and in 1877 the Russians agreed with Austria at the Budapest Convention that Russia would annex Bessarabia, and Austria-Hungary would observe benevolent neutrality towards Russia in the war, and in compensation for this, that Russia agreed that Austro-Hungary could annex Bosnia-Herzegovina. Now, 15 months later, after the war, the Russians imposed on the Turks the Treaty of San Stefano, which reneged on the Budapest Accord and declared that Bosnia-Herzegovina should be occupied by both the Russians and the Austrians. Now, that didn't keep the other powers too happy, UK and Germany above all. So in 1878 they all got together, the Treaty of Berlin, and which allowed Austria to occupy Bosnia-Herzegovina as a temporary measure until they decide what they're going to do with it. And in the Dreikaiserbund agreement in 1881, both Germany and Russia actually endorsed Austria's right to annex Bosnia-Herzegovina, although Austria didn't actually do this. And by 1897, Tsar Nicholas, who was later to be shot, had actually withdrawn his support for the Austrian annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. In 1908, the Russian Foreign Minister Alexander Volsky secretly agreed that Russia would support an Austrian annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in exchange it wanted the Bosphorus Strait opened so that the Russian warships could get in the Mediterranean. And the Austrian Foreign Minister Alois von Arenthal was really keen on this, and the problem was that when Austria annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Russian Tsar, who knew nothing about this, Nicholas II, he vigorously denied having anything to do with it, and Britain and France were pretty cheesed off. Italy and Serbia both demanded compensation. The Italians thought that they had some right to interfere in the Balkans. Austria said they're not having any of this, and this really soured relationships between Austria and Italy, even though the two countries were actually allies. But I think it may have had some effect on what happened later. Of course, when Italy entered the First World War against Austria, it was largely due to the fact that the Western allies, Britain and France, could offer Italy something, whereas Austria had nothing to offer Italy to maintain its neutrality or even to join the war on their side, as they were treaty bound had Austria itself been attacked. Franz Josef's coming towards the end of his reign. He's now in his 84th year, and we have a new diplomatic crisis. His nephew, his heir, Franz Ferdinand, is about to go off to Sarajevo to a military review. Occupied, now annexed I should say, Bosnia Herzegovina. So what happens when he's there is that Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian terrorist, kills him. And now, Franz Josef didn't get on with Franz Ferdinand at all. They didn't like each other before he got married, but when he got married, because Franz Ferdinand married Sophie, who's a Duchess of Hohenberg, she's an aristocratic, but not aristocratic enough for Franz Ferdinand. He didn't even go to the wedding, and he even forced them to agree that none of their kids could become in line to the throne. So creating a sort of more organic marriage. Now, Franz Ferdinand reputedly said that Franz Josef said it was the fault of Franz Ferdinand for defying the Almighty. And so, in this manner, a superior powers restored that order, which I unfortunately was unable to maintain. Anyway, so obviously the emperor was upset, of course. I mean, it was the empire took pride of place for him, but he wasn't upset enough to leave Bad Ischl, where he went every summer for his holidays. And so during the July crisis, the people in charge, the two people in charge in Austria, in Vienna, and these are the two people who are responsible for the millions, the tens of millions of people who died in two world wars as a result. Count Leopold Berchtold, and he was the foreign minister, and Count Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf was the chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army, and their ministers. But above all, it's these two characters. And then von Hotzendorf later proves himself to be utterly incompetent when it comes to military matters. Now, on the 21st of July 1914, Franz Josef, he hears about the ultimatum that's going to be sent to the Serbs. He doesn't like it at all, but he doesn't do anything. And he believes that Russia won't let them get away with it. Nonetheless, now let's bear in mind that by this time, Russia is also the ally of France. So we have there a larger European problem. Nonetheless, Berchtold and von Hotzendorf don't think that Russia will get involved. So a week after the ultimatum, despite the fact that the Serbs really did try to do their best to come to some kind of compromise with the Austrians, on the 28th of July, Austro-Hungary declares war, sent a telegraph to it, written in French, and so within hours, literally, the Austro-Hungarians and Russians are at war, and then it's, in a very short period, it's now all the great powers are at war on one side or the other. Franz Josef died where he was born, Schönbrunn, on the 21st November 1916. He was 86 years old, and he died of pneumonia of the right lung. He went out for a walk in Schönbrunn Park with the King of Bavaria, Ludwig III, and he was succeeded by Charles, or Karl, whose statue is up here. Somebody who, like Franz Ferdinand, possibly would have been a reformer, somebody who wanted to get out the war, to stop the war, somebody who died at a very young age. He was only 35 when he died. And had he been emperor earlier, one is left with the thought that maybe the war and what happened as a result of the First World War wouldn't actually have happened.